Comrades, let me begin with a truth so stark, so quietly brutal that once spoken, you will never unhear it. The greatest theft in modern society is not of money, land, or machinery, but of your time, your life itself, extracted from you so smoothly that you mistake the robbery for routine. You rise before dawn, you labor until exhaustion, you return home spent and hollow and still. The system whispers that this is normal, that this is freedom, that this is what life must be. But I tell you today, this quiet surrender of ours, this continuous draining of your finite existence is the most refined mechanism of exploitation capitalism has ever engineered. For what is capitalism, if not a vast apparatus designed to transform the living moments of the worker into dead capital for the owners? Marx exposed this with scientific clarity. Labor power is the only commodity whose use creates surplus value. And it is in the stretching, slicing, and consuming of your time that the ruling class builds its wealth. Your minutes are their profit. Your fatigue is their stability. Your shortened life is their longevity. And yet, this theft is hidden beneath the velvet language of opportunity and entrepreneurship. You are told that hard work is noble, that sacrifice is admirable, that to give your life to an employer is to be productive. But this is ideology. The ruling ideas of every epoch are the ideas of the ruling class. Marx reminds us. They teach you to sanctify your own exploitation, so that you never ask why you have so little time to live as you choose, why every year passes faster, why your dreams grow smaller as the workday grows longer. Consider a simple question: who controls your time? For time is the raw material of human freedom. It is the substance from which you build meaning, relationships, creativity, and purpose. To lose control over time is to lose control over yourself. This is why the capitalist does not merely buy your labor. He buys your hours, your energy, your presence. He buys your life in fragments, and because he pays you a wage that never equals the value you produce, each moment of your labor becomes a moment of dispossession. Marx wrote in Capital that the length of the working day is the battlefield, where the interests of labor and capital confront each other. Capitalism seeks not merely a fair day's work, it seeks all the time it can possibly consume, pressing the worker toward the limits of endurance while masking exploitation under the logic of necessity and competition. If technology advances, does it shorten your day? No, it intensifies your labor, expands your responsibilities, and accelerates the pace at which your life is siphoned away. The theft continues even when you are not working. You carry your job home in your mind, feeling guilt for resting, anxiety at falling behind, pressure to be available, fear of replacement. Even your leisure becomes preparation for more labor. Your rest a strategy for being more productive tomorrow. Capitalism has achieved what Marx could only begin to anticipate. It has colonized the worker's mind, stealing time, not only from your day, but from your inner life. And while your time is devoured, the ruling class accumulates hours they never labored for. They inherit wealth, leisure, influence, and the power to shape the world while the worker is left clinging to the edges of existence. This is not natural. This is not unchangeable. This is not fate. This is class domination structured, reinforced, and justified through every institution that surrounds you. But comrades, history has never been moved by resignation. Marx teaches that the emancipation of the working class must be the act of the working class itself. If your time is stolen collectively, it must be reclaimed collectively. No individual escape can free you from a system that binds billions. No personal success story alters the chains that bind the many. Only through organization, through unified struggle, through understanding your position in the great machinery of production the workers confront the silent theft that shapes their lives. To reclaim your time is to reclaim your humanity. To demand control over your labor is to demand control over your destiny. To recognize the theft is the first spark of class consciousness. To resist it is the beginning of transformation. Comrades, the clock of capitalism ticks with your stolen hours, but the clock of history waits for no one. The time to awaken is now, for the time that belongs to you will not be returned unless you rise and take it back. Capitalism steals workers' time by converting their living hours into profit, and this theft is so deeply woven into ordinary life that most people rarely pause to examine its magnitude or its consequences. Time is the raw material of human existence, the irreplaceable substance from which every experience, every relationship, every aspiration is made. Yet within capitalist society, this essential human resource is systematically appropriated, fragmented, and sold back to people in the form of wages that never reflect the true value of what they give. Workers enter the labor process with nothing but their capacity to work, and capitalism transforms that capacity into a commodity that can be bought and consumed. The moment labor power is sold, the worker relinquishes control over their hours, surrendering a portion of their finite life to a system that prioritizes accumulation for the few over freedom. For the many, Marx's analysis reveals that surplus value emerges only when the worker produces more than what is necessary to reproduce their own livelihood. This surplus is the essence of profit, the heartbeat of the capitalist economy, and it is generated entirely through the unpaid portion of the worker's day. Thus, every work shift is divided into two parts: the time in which the worker produces the equivalent of their wage, and the additional time in which they create value that they will never receive, value that flows upward to the owners of capital. This second portion is the concealed locus of exploitation, the zone where time becomes profit, where the hours of one class enrich another. The worker may experience this as simple routine, as an ordinary workday, but behind this routine lies a constant process of extraction in which the capitalist obtains wealth not through personal labor but through the appropriation of others' time. The process is intensified by the structural pressures of competition, which compel capitalists to extend, stretch, or intensify the working day in pursuit of greater surplus. Even when legal limits exist, the system finds ways to circumvent them through unpaid overtime, availability, constant monitoring, and the encroachment of work into evenings and weekends. The development of technology, which should in principle reduce labor time and liberate the worker, instead becomes a tool for further acceleration and surveillance. Machines do not free the laborer, they increase output expectations, shorten deadlines, and require constant self-discipline. The worker must adapt to the pace of the machine, compressing their own life rhythm into the mechanical tempo of production. As productivity rises, the working day rarely contracts. Instead, more value is extracted from each hour, deepening the intensity of labor and tightening the grip of capital over time. This theft continues even outside the workplace. As the ideology of productivity infiltrates the worker's consciousness, people are taught to see time not as their own, but as a resource to be optimized, monetized, and disciplined. Rest becomes guilt, leisure becomes a luxury, and personal moments feel like interruptions in the march of labor. The worker internalizes the logic of the employer, policing their own energy and accepting the fragmentation of their day as natural. The result is a life lived under invisible pressure, a gradual erosion of spontaneity, community, and self-determined activity. The hours spent commuting, preparing for work, recovering from work, and worrying about work all expand the sphere of domination beyond the workplace, consume time that is never counted as labor, yet remains shaped by the demands of capital. Meanwhile, those who own productive property accumulate vast reserves of time. Their wealth grants them freedom from necessity, freedom to direct their days. They choose freedom to enjoy the leisure that others produce but cannot afford. This division is not merely economic, it is temporal, separating society into those whose lives are determined by the clock and those who command the clock. The ruling class hoards leisure just as it hoards capital, and the more workers' time is consumed, the more leisure the elite enjoy. Capitalism not only distributes wealth unequally, it distributes life unequally, granting long, unburdened hours to a minority, while the majority struggles to carve out even small portions of time for themselves. Because workers produce the material base of society, their time becomes the invisible foundation of all economic activity. Yet the system mystifies this fact, presenting work as a moral duty, an individual responsibility, or a personal path to advancement. In truth, the worker's time is the source of every profit margin, every corporate fortune, every accumulation of capital. By reducing human life to labor time, Capitalism transforms living subjects into instruments of production, dissolving personal history into the cadence of shifts and schedules. This is the silent theft at the heart of the system, the conversion of life into labor, of labor into value, of value into profit for those who do not labor. In this way, capitalism does not simply exploit workers during the hours they clock in, it reorganizes the structure of their entire existence around the needs of accumulation, ensuring that the most precious resource they possess, their limited, irreplaceable time, is continuously siphoned away without them fully realizing the magnitude of what has been taken. The ruling class controls society by shaping how workers understand labor and freedom, constructing a system of beliefs that turns exploitation into common sense and domination into an invisible structure of daily life. From the earliest stages of industrial capitalism, those who hold economic power have recognized that material control alone is not sufficient to preserve their position. They must also influence the consciousness of those who produce the wealth of society. Marx observed that the ruling ideas of any epoch are the ideas of its ruling class, not because these ideas are inherently true, but because those who control the means of production also control the means of mental production. Schools, media, culture, religion, and the political sphere all serve as channels through which the ruling class disseminates interpretations of labor and freedom that secure its interests. These interpretations do not appear as propaganda, but as the natural order of things, as unquestioned truths that shape how workers perceive themselves and their place in the world. Workers are taught to view labor as a moral virtue, a personal responsibility, and even a measure of their worth. This framing hides the reality that labor, under capitalism, is not a free activity but a compelled one, driven by the need to survive in a system where access to life's necessities depends on selling one's labor power. By presenting work as a noble pursuit, the ruling class obscures the fact that it profits from every hour workers spend at their stations, machines, or screens. The idea that hard work leads to success serves not as a path to liberation, but as a mechanism to keep workers invested in their own subordination. It shifts attention from structural inequality to individual effort, making poverty appear as personal failure rather than a predictable outcome of a system that concentrates wealth at the top. Freedom, too, is reframed to align with the interests of the ruling class. Instead of understanding freedom as the ability to shape one's life, control one's time, and access the conditions necessary for human development, workers are told that freedom means the right to compete in the labor market, to choose between employers, or to consume products. This narrow definition reduces human potential to a series of transactions, transforming social liberty into economic choice. It teaches workers to equate freedom with the marketplace, even though the marketplace is precisely where their lack of power is most evident. They may choose between different jobs, but they cannot choose whether to work. They may choose between different commodities, but they cannot choose whether wealth is socially produced yet privately owned. By presenting these limited choices as ultimate freedom, the ruling class ensures that workers internalize a version of liberty that never threatens the foundations of capitalist control. The ruling class also shapes perceptions of inequality by promoting the idea that differences in wealth and status reflect differences in talent, intelligence, or ambition. This narrative hides the structural advantages that capitalists inherit and the systemic barriers that workers face. It frames the vast disparities of modern society as natural, inevitable, or the result of divine order or market logic. In doing so, it creates a social environment where workers blame themselves for circumstances created by forces beyond their control. This is a key mechanism of ideological domination, the transformation of systemic exploitation into personal identity, where workers measure their value through productivity, income, or job title, even as these metrics reflect conditions imposed upon them from above. Even the concept of aspiration is shaped to reinforce capitalist priorities. Workers are encouraged to dream of upward mobility, to imagine escaping their class position. But these dreams rarely challenge the system itself. Instead, they reinforce it by directing energy toward individual advancement rather than collective transformation. The ruling class promotes stories of exceptional success to overshadow the reality that the majority remain bound to wage labor. These narratives function as safety valves, offering hope without change, possibility without power. They teach workers to identify not with their own class, but with the class that exploits them, imagining themselves as future capitalists rather than present laborers, which diffuses solidarity and weakens the potential for collective action. Ideology also shapes workers' understanding of their own dissatisfaction. The stress, exhaustion, and alienation that arise from capitalist labor are attributed to personal shortcomings rather than structural conditions. Workers are taught to fix themselves through discipline, self-improvement, or better attitudes rather than questioning why their labor feels draining and fragmented. This psychological framing privatizes the consequences of exploitation, turning social problems into individual burdens. By internalizing these explanations, workers are less likely to recognize the systemic roots of their suffering and more likely to accept exploitation as an unavoidable part of life. Through all these mechanisms, the ruling class maintains its power not only by controlling material resources, but by shaping the mental frameworks through which workers interpret their reality. By defining what counts as labor, what counts as freedom, and what counts as possible, it narrows the horizon of imagination and prevents workers from envisioning alternatives to the system that governs their lives. Control over time is control over life, and capitalism monopolizes this control by structuring society in ways that dictate how people work, rest, and even think, reducing human existence to a sequence of hours disciplined for production. Time is not merely a measure of duration. It is the fabric of experience, the vessel through which individuals express their abilities, nurture relationships, and shape their identities. Yet under capitalism, time becomes an external force imposed on the worker, coordinated by schedules, deadlines, and the unyielding demand for productivity. The system claims ownership over the very rhythm of life, transforming each moment into a resource to be extracted, optimized, and consumed in service of profit. In this way, the worker's autonomy over their own existence is diminished, replaced by a relentless cycle of labor that prioritizes accumulation over well-being. The capitalist mode of production is founded on the idea that labor power can be bought for a given period, and with that purchase comes control over the worker's time. When individuals enter wage labor, they surrender not only their effort, but the hours during which that effort is exerted. Those hours no longer belong to them. They are appropriated by the employer, who determines the pace, intensity, and structure of work. Marx identified this as the core of exploitation. The worker sells time, but the capitalist commands it, using it to generate value that returns not to the laborer but to the owners of capital. The more time the capitalist can appropriate, the more surplus value can be extracted. Thus, the pursuit of profit becomes a pursuit of time itself, a continuous effort to extend or intensify the duration of labor, often without the worker recognizing how profoundly their life is being shaped by forces outside their control. As capitalism develops, it expands its dominance over time far beyond the workplace. The boundaries that once separated labor from personal life erode under the pressure of competition, technological acceleration, and the ideology of constant availability. Workers are expected to respond to messages after hours, to sacrifice weekends, to compress rest into short intervals, and to prepare themselves mentally for the next cycle of work. Even when off the clock, they carry the psychological weight of deadlines, performance metrics, and future anxieties. Time that should be free becomes a mere extension of labor time, filled with obligations that serve the needs of employers rather than the aspirations of workers. In this way, capitalism colonizes not only the hours explicitly bought through wages, but also the hours workers believe are their own. Technological progress, which should theoretically reduce the burden of labor, often results in the opposite effect. Machines increase productivity, but instead of shortening the workday, they raise expectations and tighten schedules. Digital tools accelerate communication but also create non-stop surveillance. Algorithms organize tasks with precision but remove space for breath, reflection, or autonomy. Workers are forced to match the speed of technology, adjusting their biological and emotional rhythms to the pace of machines. Capitalism transforms technology into an instrument for intensifying the control of time, ensuring that every second is accounted for measured and squeezed for maximum output. This produces a form of temporal domination in which the worker's natural human rhythms, fatigue, creativity, curiosity, reflection, are subordinated to the rhythm of capital. The ruling class, meanwhile, enjoys a vastly different relationship to time. Wealth purchases leisure, flexibility, and the freedom to choose how one's days unfold. The elite are able to live without the compulsion to constantly sell their hours for survival. They can plan futures, cultivate talents, and enjoy rest that is not overshadowed by the demands of work. They possess the privilege of slow mornings, unhurried decisions, and long-term thinking. Their time is expansive, open, and self-determined, while the time of the worker is compressed, scheduled, and externally controlled. This temporal inequality mirrors and reinforces economic inequality, creating a division in which one class lives in abundance of time while the other lives in scarcity. The ideology of capitalism further deepens this divide by teaching workers to view time in ways that reinforce their own subordination. People are encouraged to think of time as money, as a commodity to be invested or wasted, as something that gains value only when used productively. This mindset aligns the worker's consciousness with the needs of capital, prompting them to discipline their own schedules, suppress their own desires, and interpret rest as laziness. It transforms the worker into both subject and enforcer of capitalist time, internalizing pressures that should be recognized as external burdens imposed by a system that prioritizes profit over human flourishing. Instead of questioning why their time feels insufficient, workers blame themselves for inefficiency, disorganization, or lack of ambition, absorbing guilt for conditions created by structural exploitation. Temporal domination also undermines the worker's ability to develop their capacities fully. When time is monopolized by labor, individuals have little left for education, creativity, community, or political engagement. They become isolated, fatigued, and distracted, unable to participate meaningfully in collective life. This weakens solidarity and narrows imagination, making it more difficult for workers to envision alternative social arrangements. Time poverty becomes a tool of social control, preventing people from organizing, reflecting on their conditions, or fighting for systemic change. By occupying the worker's hours so completely, capitalism not only extracts value but also limits the possibility for resistance, ensuring that the struggle for survival overshadows the struggle for liberation. Class consciousness begins when workers recognize the silent theft of their own existence. When the ordinary routines of daily life suddenly appear as mechanisms of domination rather than natural features of society. This awakening does not occur through abstract theory alone, but through the lived experiences of exhaustion, insecurity, and the vague yet persistent sense that something fundamental is being taken from them. Workers begin to see that what has been stolen is not merely wages or comfort, but the very substance of their lifetime, energy, creativity, and the possibility of shaping their own destinies. This realization marks the first rupture in the ideological veil that capitalism drapes over reality. The first moment when individuals understand that their suffering is not personal failure, but a symptom of a broader system designed to exploit them. Marx describes this transformation as the shift from being a class in itself to a class for itself, a process in which workers discover not only their shared oppression but their potential power. The silent theft of existence manifests in countless ways that workers initially accept as normal. They endure long hours that leave them too tired to think or feel deeply. They sacrifice time with loved ones, hobbies, and dreams for the sake of survival. They carry stress home like a second job, waking at night with worries about rent, bills, or job security. These experiences feel individual, yet they are shared by millions. As workers begin comparing their struggles and recognizing the common patterns that shape their lives, they start to perceive the underlying structure of exploitation. They realize that their exhaustion is not a personal problem, but a systemic outcome of a mode of production that depends on squeezing as much labor as possible from every waking moment. The recognition that this exhaustion is deliberate, built into the logic of capital, becomes a catalyst for new ways of thinking and seeing. The world-class consciousness develops further when workers connect their experiences to the broader economic forces that govern society. They start questioning why, despite working harder than ever, they feel more precarious, why productivity increases yet wages stagnate, why wealth concentrates in the hands of a minority who do not labor. They begin to see that capitalism operates through the extraction of surplus value, a process that requires the continual appropriation of workers' time, creativity, and life energy. This understanding fosters a sense of collective injury, a clear perception that the system thrives, precisely because workers are systematically deprived of the full fruits of their labor. It becomes evident that the silent theft is not accidental but fundamental to how capitalism functions, and that no individual effort can overcome. A structure built on inequality. As this awareness deepens, workers begin to recognize the ideological distortions that have kept them compliant. They see how the ruling class frames overworkers' dedication, poverty as personal failure, and economic insecurity as the natural result of market forces. They question the narratives that celebrate individual success stories, while hiding the reality that millions struggle despite immense effort. They perceive how media, education, and culture normalize exploitation by presenting it as unavoidable or even virtuous. This ideological unmasking is a crucial step in class consciousness because it reveals that domination persists not only through economic power, but through control over meaning, perception, and belief. The worker begins to claim ownership over their own understanding of the world, rejecting interpretations imposed by those who benefit from their subordination. Class consciousness also emerges when workers recognize each other as comrades in a shared condition rather than competitors in a marketplace. Capitalism isolates individuals, pitting them against each other for jobs, promotions, or survival. But as workers grasp the systemic nature of their exploitation, they begin to see that their interests align far more closely with those of their fellow workers than with the interests of employers or elites. Solidarity arises from the realization that their problems are collective, that their struggles resonate across workplaces, industries, and nations. This sense of shared fate breaks down the isolation that capitalism depends on, replacing it with the beginnings of unity. With this unity comes the understanding that workers possess immense latent power. They see that they are the essential producers of society, that nothing moves without their labor, and that their collective action has the potential to reshape the entire social order. This recognition shifts the narrative from one of resignation to one of possibility. The silent theft of their existence becomes the basis for collective outrage, and collective outrage becomes the foundation for collective action. Class consciousness transforms despair into determination, revealing that workers need not accept the terms imposed upon them. It shows that the world they inhabit is neither eternal nor unchangeable, but constructed through relations that can be dismantled, reimagined, and replaced. In this awakening, workers reclaim not only an understanding of their exploitation, but also a sense of their own humanity. They begin to see that their lives are not meant to be consumed by labor, that their time is not simply raw material for profit, and that their potential extends beyond the confines imposed by capital. Class consciousness restores dignity by asserting that workers deserve control over their own existence, that they possess the right to shape their own futures, and that the conditions of their lives are not immutable facts but political and economic choices made by those in power. Through this realization, the silent theft becomes visible, and once visible, it becomes intolerable. Only collective organization can reclaim workers' time and transform society, because the power that deprives workers of their lives is not individual but systemic, rooted in the structural logic of capitalism and reinforced through institutions designed to protect the interests of the ruling class. No matter how skilled, dedicated, or resilient a worker may be, they cannot escape the conditions imposed upon them by a system in which a minority owns the means of production, while the majority must sell their labor to survive. Individual effort cannot alter the fact that employers control schedules, dictate the length and intensity of the workday, and determine how much of a worker's time is appropriated in the form of surplus value. Only when workers unite, understand their shared condition, and organize collectively can they confront this imbalance of power and begin to reclaim the time that has been taken from them under the guise of necessity. Or efficiency collective organization begins with the recognition that the problems workers face are not isolated incidents, but interconnected consequences of a system that prioritizes profit over human life. Long working hours, precarity, inadequate wages, burnout, and the erosion of leisure time all stem from the capitalist imperative to maximize surplus value. When workers attempt to address these issues individually, they encounter the full weight of the employer's authority. A single worker who demands shorter hours can be dismissed, replaced, or ignored, but a unified workforce that makes the same demand becomes a force that must be negotiated with. In unity, workers shift from being isolated individuals to being a collective class capable of asserting its interests against those who benefit from their exploitation historically. Every major improvement in the working day, whether the 8-hour day, the weekend, overtime limits, or workplace protections, was won through collective action. These victories were not gifts from the ruling class, but concessions extracted through strikes, mass mobilizations, and organized pressure. This historical record demonstrates a fundamental truth. Capital yields nothing without being compelled. Employers seek to extract as much labor time as possible, and without organized resistance, the working day expands, intensifies, or becomes more invasive. Collective organization is the only force that can counter the institutional momentum of capital, because it confronts employers with the one power that cannot easily replace the coordinated withdrawal of labor-organized workers. Also challenge the ideological structures that justify exploitation. Capitalism teaches individuals to see themselves as separate competitors, each responsible for their own success or failure. Collective organization breaks this illusion by revealing the shared condition of workers' lives and the collective nature of their struggles. When workers gather, discuss their experiences, and recognize patterns of exploitation, they dismantle the narratives that blame them for systemic injustices. They begin to see that the silent theft of their time is not the result of personal shortcomings, but a deliberate feature of the economic system. This ideological clarity is itself a form of power, because it undermines the legitimacy of the structures that uphold exploitation and enables workers to imagine alternatives to the present order. Moreover, collective organization creates the condition through which workers can reclaim not only their time but their humanity. Through unions, councils, cooperatives, and worker-led movements, laborers develop democratic practices that allow them to assert control over their own lives. They make decisions collectively, share responsibilities, and build institutions grounded in solidarity rather than profit. In these spaces, workers discover capacities that capitalism suppresses: the ability to lead, to strategize, to debate, to imagine, and to shape their environment. Collective organization becomes a school of democracy, teaching workers that they do not need to be ruled by owners or managers, that they possess the intelligence and strength to guide their own affairs. The transformation of society requires more than isolated reforms. It demands a reconfiguration of the relationship between time, labor, and life. Capitalism treats time as a commodity that can be bought and sold, but collective organization reveals it as a social resource that should be shared, protected, and used to enrich human development. When workers organize, they can demand shorter workdays, guaranteed rest, meaningful wages, and social protection that restore their ability to pursue education, creativity, community, and political engagement. These demands are not merely economic. They strike at the heart of capitalist domination. By challenging the system's control over the rhythm of life itself, as workers deepen their organization, they also begin to question the private ownership of the means of production that lies at the root of temporal domination. They recognize that true liberation requires more than regulating the workday. It requires transforming the economic foundations of society so that production serves human needs rather than capital accumulation. Collective organization thus becomes not only a tool for immediate improvements but a pathway toward a new social order in which time is no longer a commodity but a shared human inheritance. Through solidarity, workers acquire the capacity to reshape institutions, redefine priorities, and build a society where the time of all people, not just the elite, is valued, protected, and directed toward collective flourishing. In the end, the struggle against capitalism is a struggle to reclaim life itself, for the system does not simply extract labor, it extracts time, possibility, and the very essence of human existence. When workers awaken to the silent theft that shapes their days, when they recognize how their hours are transformed into profit for others, when they see how their understanding of labor and freedom has been shaped to serve the interests of the powerful, a new consciousness emerges, one that dissolves the illusions that kept them obedient and isolated. From that moment forward, the path becomes clear. Only through unity, only through the collective organization of the working class, can the massive machinery of exploitation be confronted and overturned. The ruling class commands society because it commands time, but workers produce the world, and the world moves only because they give their lives to it. If they withdraw that consent, if they stand together, if they see control over their own time, they seize control over history itself. The future belongs not to those who hoard wealth, but to those who create it, not to the minority who monopolize life, but to the majority who make life possible. The moment workers rise, organize, and reclaim what has been taken from them, the silent theft ends and the transformation of society begins.